Hi everyone. In this tutorial we're going to cover gradients and how to color with gradients in your project. Let's get started. Okay, so to begin you're going to want to bring up a couple panels. If you go to Window, we'll bring up our Color panel, and we're also going to bring up our Gradients panel. Okay, so with those open, we can start coloring with some gradients. So I'm going to start with my background here. First I'll just hide my scarecrow, which we colored with the flat colors. We're going to hide that. I'm going to select my sky. I can either click on it or come to my background and grab my sky. To add your gradient, you'll want to come down here. So we have our color fill. We also have the none, which takes it off. And then in the middle here we have gradient. So if we click that, it's going to add a gradient to our sky. So right now we have a black and white gradation of white down to black. If you want to adjust some of the properties of your gradient, you could do it in here, or you can use the gradient tool on the side here. And you can get to that by using the shortcut G. So you want to click on that, and you have to make sure that you've already added a gradient. So once you've added a gradient from down here, you can use your gradient tool. So what that does is add this bar right here to your gradient. So you have a few options here. You can grab down here, so the circle one is kind of where it's pinned, and the square end here is where you can rotate it. This also lets you adjust the position of it, so you can move it around, lift it up. You can also adjust the length of it if you grab this end and just bring it in. I'm just going to rotate it back. And you just have to hover till you see that little rotation icon, and that lets you rotate it. So if you want to flip it so the black is on top and the white is on the bottom, you just have to rotate it around. But right now, since it's so far off screen, we're only seeing the white, so I'm going to pan over, grab it, and you want to grab it from the anchor point here and just move it down. So now I have black on top and white on the bottom. With these little sliders here, you could adjust where your black starts and ends. And you can also do that with the white. And you also have this midpoint icon that lets you adjust the midpoint of it. Okay, some of your other options are in here in the gradient panel. So right now this is linear. It's just going in a line from top to bottom or left to right. You also have radial, which gives you a circular gradient from the inside out or the outside in, depending on how you want it. And with your gradient tool, you have some options here. So you could adjust the size of the radial gradient. And you also have the same options just for adjusting the spread. So you'll want to use the radial gradients for your circular objects, like this moon here. But for this sky, I'm going to go back to linear. So I'm going to want it to be top to bottom, so I can rotate this, or I could come into the angle here and change it from here. You can pick different angles, and it automatically flips it. Okay, so it automatically goes to black and white for the gradient, and I want to add some color to this. What you want to do to change the color is come down to the swatches here on the slider. This is the white one, this is the black one. If you double click that, it's going to open up your color palette and you can change it here. Now for some reason by default, Illustrator has it set to grayscale, so you can only choose between black and white and gray in here. But if you come up to this icon here and click it, you can switch it to CMYK, which is the color we're using for this project. So select that, and now you have all of the colors, so you can find a color you like, and it's going to just change it for that part of the gradient. We can come and do that again for this one. We'll double click it, and again it's only in black and white, so we'll switch it to CMYK, and we can select our color here. So I'm going to pick a darker blue, maybe darken it up quite a bit. I think actually with this one I'll go with something more purple. Yeah, something like that. And so now I get a gradient going from purple up to black. Okay, and you can't see the stroke around it since it comes off the screen, but you're going to want to select it and also take the stroke off by selecting the stroke and hitting none. Alright, next up let's try a radial gradient on the moon. Okay, so I'm going to select my moon. I'm going to take the stroke off now. I'll hit none. I don't want to hit gradient here since we have the stroke selected. It's going to add a gradient to that little stroke on it. So we want to make sure we have our fill color selected, which is white, and then we'll switch it to gradient. And it's going to bring up our last swatch we had on there, which is the purple to black gradient. Okay, so let's switch this to a radial gradient. And so now the purple starts on the inside and moves its way out. So instead of purple, I'm going to double click that and go with something like a light yellow. And so that changes the inside color, and then the outside one we have is black. So I'm going to select that, and I'll pick something a little brighter. And you can adjust it in here as well. Okay, so that gives us a nice subtle gradation from the lighter yellow out to the edges where it's a darker yellow. And this is a good way to add a three-dimensional feel to some of your objects. It just gives it a little more form. You can also change the gradient colors by selecting them from your color palette here. So if we select the darker one here, I can just come over and slide around in here, and it'll change that color in there. So that just does it without double clicking on here. I'm going to undo that. Now just a heads up, if you're going to do gradients, you probably want to do it to everything, because if you have some things as flat colors like this and then some things as gradients, it's going to look a little weird. So you want to be consistent with it and pick one way or the other. If you want to go with flat colors like this, you can still give it that three-dimensional feel by adding shadows and highlights, and that will be covered in some of the week 6 tutorials. You can also add more colors to your gradient if you want more than the 2 here. So I'm just going to select my moon, and then if you hover under the slider here, you'll see that little plus sign next to my cursor. If you click, it's going to add a third color. You can also add another one by clicking again. So if you want to get rid of that, you just grab it and then drag down, and it'll pull it off of the slider. So then again, you can just double click that and add a third color. So right now it gradates from a yellow to green to yellow, and you have all the same options where you can drag those around and adjust the spread. Alright, that's going to be it for this tutorial on gradients.